So I'm going to go over the polynomials test. Sorry, the polynomials test. I ran out of air. I don't know what happened. And then hopefully you can figure out where your mistake is and then get half credit back. Okay. So we're dividing the polynomial by x minus 2. A student can determine the remainder by evaluating p of 2. So what it's saying is plug in the number 2 for all the x's. Alright. I'm running out of room, sorry. So I'm going to put that in my calculator, and you get negative 64. So if you evaluated this, you plugged in 2 for the polynomial, you would have got negative 64. That's why the answer choice is C. Kind of the same thing for this one. You were dividing it by x plus 4. So if you set that equal to 0, x equals negative 4. So you would have plugged in a negative 4 into all the x's, and this would have been your remainder. So that's why B is the answer choice. Okay, so you got this equation for volume. The height of the prism is x plus 1. Which expression could represent the length of the prism? And really, you don't need any of this information because what you're trying to figure out is which one actually makes sense. So if you look at A, you're dividing by x minus 2, which you would set equal to 0, so x would be equal to 2. So you would plug 2 in for the volume, and you would want 0 as a remainder. So D doesn't make sense because your remainder is negative 6, which wouldn't even be a factor. And then notice C also doesn't make sense because the remainder would be 4. And then B is not it because it's x minus 3, and when you plug that in, you should get a positive 3 right there. So the only one that even makes sense, according to this notation, is A. Alright, then we're going to use the remainder theorem again. So we got this polynomial, and notice you got that k in front of x. We're trying to figure out for what value k is x plus 3 a factor. And remember, in order to be a factor, the remainder would be 0. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this that we're dividing by, set it equal to 0, so I get x equals negative 3. I'm going to replace all the x's with negative 3. Plus 15. And I want my remainder to be 0 because I want it to be a factor. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to simplify all of this a little bit. Okay, so we get this. And now I'm going to get all my like terms together. Alright, so I got negative 3k plus 24 equals 0. I'm going to move the 24 to the other side by subtracting. And then the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to divide both sides by negative 3. So negative 24 divided by negative 3 is 8. So the only number that would work to give you a remainder of 0 would be 8. Okay. Alright, so this one, pretty much the same thing. We're dividing by x minus 2. So x equals 2. I'm going to replace all the x's with the number 2, and that's going to give me my remainder. Remember, if you don't like doing this, you could actually divide, and you would get the same answer. It would just be a longer process. So I'm going to put all of this in my calculator, and I get 9, which is why the answer choice is C. Okay. This one's talking about the zeros of the polynomial. Notice the polynomial is already in factored form, so the quickest way to find the zeros is to take the factors and set them equal to 0. Alright, so x would equal 2, x would equal negative 3, 2x would equal negative 3, divide both sides by 2, x equals, well, that's a weird x, sorry, negative 3 halves. That negative 1 1/2 is the same thing as negative 3 halves. If you don't remember that, you're forgetting stuff from middle school, improper and proper fractions. Alright, same thing with this one. This time it says x-intercepts. Remember, that's the same thing as zeros. So we're going to take our factors, and we're going to set them equal to 0, and we're going to solve. So x equals 5, 2x equals negative 3, x equals negative 3 halves. Also remember that B and C wouldn't be choices because when you're talking about x-intercepts, the y-coordinate is the one that's 0. Okay. So for number 8, you have two different functions going on, this one and this one. and then it wants to know h of x, and it tells you that you need to multiply those original two functions. So I'm going to take 2x minus 1, and I'm going to multiply it to negative x squared plus x minus 3. And I'm just going to use the distributive property. So this becomes negative 2x cubed plus 2x squared minus 6x. Now I'm going to distribute the 1. It becomes positive 1x squared minus 1x, positive 3. And now I'm going to get my like terms together. My handwriting is getting worse and worse. I apologize. The answer is D. So which equation best represents this graph? All you gotta do is graph them. If you missed this one, I'm guessing that maybe you just typed it in wrong. Just notice where the vertex is. It's at 0, 0. So when you graph these, look at the vertex. Okay. This one talking about in behavior. So the first thing I'm gonna do is graph this function. And you can either use Desmos or you can use a graphing calculator, and I'm going to sketch a little graph. Okay, so notice what the ends do. The left end goes up, the right end goes down. These are flipped around like we don't normally see, but this is saying, so as x approaches negative infinity, that means left side. F of x approaches infinity means it goes up, which is exactly what happens right there. Then the first part, as x approaches positive infinity, remember that means right side. It says f of x approaches negative infinity, which means it goes down, and that's right there. So for whatever reason, sometimes they will put in behavior just flipped around like we would normally write it, but you need to be able to understand that they're saying the exact same thing as we would. It's just kind of weird. It's like they're saying the car red instead of the red car. I don't know why they choose to do this, but sometimes that happens. Same thing with this one. We're going to do in behavior, so I'm going to graph the function and sketch a little graph. Alright, so if you'll notice, on this one, both ends are going down. So, once again, it's flipped around as we normally see it. X approaches negative infinity, that's your left side. F of x approaches negative infinity means it's going down, which is exactly what's happening on the left side. Then when it says x approaches positive infinity, that's what right side means. F of x approaches negative infinity, goes down. So there it is again. So flipped around from what we would normally see, but it means the same thing. Alright, so for this one, you want to know when is the graph lower than 0. So the first thing I want you to do is pick out the 3 places it hits the x-axis. It hits it at -3, it hits it at -2, and it hits at 1. I don't know why I wrote that one so weird. Let me try again. Because I wasn't paying attention to what I was doing. Okay. So it's not A because it doesn't even say all 3 numbers. It's not B because it doesn't say all 3 numbers. But if you look at that first point, that -3, it's below 0 anytime it's to the left of -3. Alright, and then anytime it's between -2 and 1, anytime x is between -2 and 1, it's also below 0. So that's why it's answer choice C. Okay, and then which function does the graph represent? All you gotta do is graph those in the calculator and match them up. So notice the window's a little off. See how it goes up to 300 and it goes down to -300, over to 10 and -10. You might need to just change your window so that you can see it a little bit better. But all you gotta do is match it, so it's B. Okay, which graph represents a cubic function with zeros at... Okay, so that's where it hits the x-axis. It definitely hits at -3, -1, and 2. And the in behavior, see, once again, it's that backwards format. It says as x goes to infinity, which is the very right side. Look at the right side, it's going up. and it says f of x goes to positive infinity, which means going up. So A is the only one that has the zeros in the correct place, and the right end of the graph is going up. Alright, so you had a cardboard box. It was 8 by 12. You cut out 4 square corners, which were x by x. And we want to know the domain for the volume. So volume is equal to length times width times height. The length was 8, but then we took away 2 x's. The height was 12. No, sorry. The length was 8 minus 2x. The width was 12, but we took away 2 x's, and the height of the box is x. So now I'm going to take this function, and I'm going to graph it into my calculator. Okay, so here's a little sketch. And the only volume that makes sense is between here and here. Because once you go past 4, your volume starts to be negative, which isn't a thing. So the only one that works for this situation is when x is between 0 and 4, because that's the only places you have a positive volume. I know that you start to have positive volume after 6, but you have to account for in between here. So you just cut it off where it starts being negative. Alright, this one is talking about surface area. We're not talking about volume anymore, so this is a 12 by 16. Once again, you cut away 4 square corners. They were x by x. So if I wanted to find the surface area, 12 times 16 is 192, and then I took away these corners, and if I find the area of the corners, it's x times x, which is x squared, x squared, x squared, x squared, and there are 4 of them, which is why my answer choice is D. Alright, this one's talking about equivalent expressions. So I got x plus 3 cubed, which means the quantity 3 times. I'm going to have to use the distributive property. Remember, you can only multiply 2 things at once. So now I'm going to distribute the x to everything. And I'm going to distribute the 3 to everything. And if you do it in a different order than me, we should still get the same thing. I'm going to get my like terms together. And remember, all I've done are this part right here. I still haven't distributed the negative 9x to everything, so I'm going to do that now. So negative 9x times x, negative 9x squared. Negative 9x times 3, negative 27x. I'm going to cross out what will cancel out, and I'm left with x to the third plus 27, which is why the answer choice is A. Alright, so for this one, you got this function right here. The remainder of the division of p of x by x plus 1 is negative 8. So if I had divided by x plus 1, I would have got x equals negative 1. So I'm going to take that negative 1 and replace the letter x with negative 1s plus k, and I know that my remainder should be negative 8. So I'm going to work backwards to figure out what k should have been, and then I'm going to do the rest of the problem. Okay, so the last thing I need to do is add 16 to the other side, so I get k equals 8. Okay, that's not what the question's asking, but that's important to know. I want to know what's the remainder when I divide by x minus 1. Okay, so if I divide by x minus 1, then I'm going to replace all the x's with a positive 1. So that's what I'm going to do this time. And because I know that k is 8, I'm going to plug 8 in for k. Alright, so I'm going to type all of this into the calculator, and that's going to give me my remainder. And I get 20, which is why answer choice is D. Alright, so if x minus 5 is a factor, then I'm going to do synthetic division using 5. So I'm going to write out my coefficients. I'm going to bring down the first number. I'm going to multiply and add, multiply and add, multiply and add. So I'm left with 8x squared plus 3x plus 7. So this is a quadratic. Unfortunately, it's not going to be able to be factored, so I'm going to use the quadratic formula. So x is equal to negative b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. You're welcome because of my awesome singing abilities. The negative in front of a positive 3 is a negative 3 plus or minus square root. I'm going to put everything under the radical in my calculator. I get negative 215 divided by 2 times 8 is 16. Alright, anytime you have a negative inside a radical, that is when you bring out the number I. Oh. So if I could reduce the square root of 215, I would. If there were things to simplify, I would, but I'm done. So that's why the answer choice is A. Okay. Alright, so here's my formula for volume. It tells me the length is x minus 6 and the height and the width are equal. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use x minus 6 and I'm going to do synthetic division with that, and I'm going to break that cubic down to a quadratic. So I'm going to do synthetic division, multiply, add, multiply, and then I'm going to add, and I'm going to multiply, then I'm going to add. So I'm left with x squared plus 4x plus 4. I'm looking for two numbers that when I multiply them, I get 4. When I add them, I get 4. The only two numbers are 2 and 2. So x plus 2 and x plus 2 are my height and my width. So that's why the answer choice is A. This one's talking about equivalent expressions. Just make sure that you are getting the right like terms together. Okay. So those are the only quintics. When I add those together, I get x to the 5th. This one is the only cubic. And then these are the only constant. So A is my answer choice. Oh, sorry. Got a little trigger happy. Okay. This one is just notation, once again. The table below shows ordered pairs that belong to a polynomial. If f of x is a cubic polynomial, which conclusion is valid? So in order to be a factor, you would have a remainder of 0. So this is kind of like when we did those, that lesson for linear factors, multiplicity, zeros. So here's my 0. If I work backwards, that's my linear factor. So that's how I get A. X minus 1 must be a factor because it hits the x-axis at x equals 1. Alright. This is also from that 0 linear factors and multiplicity videos. If x equals negative 1 is a 0, then x plus 1 is a factor. Because it has a multiplicity of 2, it actually occurs twice, so I'm going to write it twice. If x equals negative 2 is a 0, then x plus 2 is a factor. Multiplicity of 1 means it occurs once. If x equals 4 is a 0, then x minus 4 is a factor. Multiplicity of 1 means it occurs once. So here's what I'm going to do. Remember that you can only multiply two things at once. So here's what I'm choosing to do, but you can do it in a little bit different order. It's the same thing. Okay, and now I'm going to distribute these two together. Alright, so I get x to the 4th minus 2x cubed minus 8x squared. Now I'm going to do the 2x to everything. So plus 2x cubed minus 4x squared minus 16x. And now I need to distribute the 1 to everything. And I'm running out of room, sorry. So minus, sorry, that should be a 2x squared. Hold on, I got distracted by my phone. I shouldn't have looked at it. 1 times x squared is 1x squared. Got it. 1 times a negative 2x, negative 2x. 1 times a negative 8, negative 8. So now I'm going to add all of these together. Alright, so x to the 4th, that's done. These are going to cancel out. That's nice. This one will give me negative 11x squared. This one, negative 18x and minus 8. So it looks like I have a typo in the answer choices, so I apologize for that. Unless I did something wrong, which is entirely possible. But it looks like I did everything right. Okay, so if you missed this one, you can come talk to me about it and I could give you some points back. If you don't come talk to me about it, then I think you're good with your grade. Alright, so a function is shown below. What's the distance to the nearest hundredth of a unit between the two zeros? So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to graph this and I'm going to find the two closest zeros. Graph this in Desmo, sorry. These are my two closest zeros. So the distance from negative 2 to 0 is 2 because distance can't be negative. And then the distance from 0 to 0.25 is 0.25. And then when you add those numbers together, that's how you're getting 2.25. So if you forgot the distance is always positive, you may have gotten the wrong answer. Or if you didn't find the zeros, you got the wrong answer. But hopefully now you know what you're doing. Okay, last one. The graph of the function right here has a zeros at negative 1 plus or minus the square root of 5. What's the other zero of the function? I think the easiest thing to do is put this in Desmos and see if you can look at the other zero. Alright, so these are these right here, so we're good. The only one I haven't used is right there, so it's negative 1. Alright, so I need you to find your mistake. That's how you learn. I know it's annoying, but I've showed you how to do the problems. You should already know the answer. I want you to figure out what you did wrong. Explain that to me as best you can. If you still need help, ask me questions, of course. And then turn in your corrections and you'll get half credit back if I find it worthy enough. Okay, bye.